So I do reviews, but I also do obviously interviews like this, and I cover red carpets as well. And so that's other media production that I have to do. And so it's a lot.
It's a lot. Yeah.
But I mean, I'm sure being a filmmaker is also a lot.
It is a lot.
I've not had the privilege yet of being on a set, but that's why I have these conversations. I mean, and this is your feature directorial debut.
Yeah.
I'm so ready to jump into it.
Yeah. No, of course.
So Meredith, we're here to talk about your film Seagrass. I appreciate you making the time for this. This is such a multifaceted film with the themes that's going on and the characters that we're following and everyone's conflicts that they're dealing with. What's the first question that I have? I have a lot of them. I want to start with the context that formed the basis for this film. Where did the family drama story come from? Where did how much of your own lived experience is a part of this story? And where did the legend with the cave and the spirits come from?
Okay, well,
there's a lot of questions in there, so we can break it down.
No, I absolutely can. So I think that the overall story first came from this desire to look at a divorce, but I wasn't really interested in looking at just kind of whether the couple will stay together or not. I really wanted to look at how it sort of created this unstable foundation for each of the three female characters in particular, the mother and the two daughters. And what was the second part of the question?
Yeah, so also how much of your own lived experience is a part of the story.
Of course. So I really see this as a very fictional story. It incorporates some personal themes such as my identity as a Japanese Canadian person. I think I also have dealt with anxiety in my life, so I can relate to some of the characters in that sense, especially Emmy, the youngest. But in terms of the family component, it's very different actually. I think in the film you see a couple who are maybe, obviously going through a really hard time, and sometimes they're not really being the most responsible parents as a result, and that was not my experience. My parents did get divorced, but I never saw them argue. They had this really complicated system of splitting time, but there was no arguments. It was really responsible. My dad is completely different from Steve, so I wasn't drawing on my family experience for his character. Or even my mom, I think, Judith's character is quite different. I really brought a lot of my own kind of fears and kind of the things that I think about to each of the female characters in particular. So yeah, I guess it's personal in that sense, but not it's fictional still,
That's fair. Judith is a character that I want to spend a little bit of time on because the movie kind of, from what I can see, revolves around her. They're on this retreat, as far as I can tell, because of a recent life event that was traumatizing to her with the passing of her mother. She's having doubts about her marriage and what she really wants out of the relationship. I mean, even motherhood comes up in the movie. Talk more about the development of Judith and organizing all this very complicated character.
Yeah, I think that's a great word to say it, is how did you organize this character? And no one's ever phrased it like that before, but I think that's such a great way of putting it, because as I was writing about everything, like you said, it's a multifaceted story, and I wanted to make sure that it still felt cohesive, but I did want it to be multifaceted. I think that with the themes I was looking at, there, for me at least, was a way to be multifaceted. And for Judith's character, I knew that everything that she was looking at was identity. And like I said, we're looking at these unstable foundations for all of the characters, so everything should relate back to that, or that's how I kind of organize my thoughts, is that it should relate back to them all having these unstable foundations. But for Judith, what that meant was her feeling kind of unstable in her identity and kind of questioning her identity a lot as a mother, as a woman, and also her racial identity as a Japanese Canadian person. So that's how I organized what she's going through, and just I really wanted it to all relate back to her identity.
It is it's certainly a lot as a viewer to try to process and understand this character. So I can only imagine how complicated it is for a character in her situation. But I also want to ask about the children as well in the movie, because they have their own set of conflicts that they have to deal with that also deal with social interaction and identity as well.
Yeah.
Talk to me about the development of those characters.
Yeah. So same as with Judith, I think there's a component. There's a component to both of their experiences that relates back to fear, and that unstable foundation. So I think for Stephanie's character, what she's going through is just this massive shift where she's kind of moving out of childhood slowly into teenagehood and everything that goes along with that, wanting to have her independence, wanting to belong, but not always feeling like she belongs. And with the youngest, I was really interested in looking at fear in a more tangible way, where she's literally encountering death for the first time and existential questions around it. And I think that she is really just kind of understanding for the first time that, some more complex, deeper human emotions that maybe she hadn't experienced before. So yeah, that's what I was interested in looking at with their journeys.
Absolutely.
Oh, I didn't answer your question about the cave from earlier.
Oh, the cave, that's
Sorry.
right. It was going to come back up.
Yeah, I wanted it to. Well, right now is maybe a good time because I think the cave really ties into kind of Emmy's journey. Of course, she has this fascination, this intense fear of what this sort of darkness within the cave holds. And there's this myth around the cave that if you look into it, then you could resurrect the ghost of someone potentially. And she has this kind of obsession throughout the film that maybe she has, and maybe she has. And to me, the cave just really represents all of these unanswered questions, this nebulous dark space that we don't understand. And I think it represents what all of the characters are going through, but it also represents, our histories and the things that kind of haunt us or follow us that we can't always comprehend. And of course, just quite literally her relationship to fear and this unknown that she's trying to figure out. Yeah.
It's I could watch this movie multiple times over and over again, because I feel like there's so much to take away from it, and there's a lot that you can really relate to, I guess, like from every perspective. Even when it comes to the two couples in the movie, and this idea of wanting, the grass is greener on the other side, right? And having that longing for that. I thought that was also a really fascinating theme that comes up in the film. And I don't know if you want to elaborate more on Steve's character or the couple that they engage with at the retreat.
Well, I think Pat and Carol, the other couple, are really funny characters, and I wanted that, of course. But what I found really interesting as I was writing them, it came really naturally, like writing those characters. But I think what I was doing as I was writing them was their projection. And how we see them in the film is a projection, and it's either from Judith's point of view, this kind of perfect, relationship, this perfect guy, like that's her projection. And then Steve is kind of seeing this other side where he sees him as this obnoxious asshole. Like I wanted to kind of show both sides of Pat and of Carol. Because I think that's what the two central characters are seeing, and that's what makes it kind of interesting, is I think there's always these people in real life who we come across, and, whether you're in a relationship or just in another context, and you're like, what? I love that person. The other person's like, no, they're so annoying. Yeah.
It's so true, having those different perspectives.
Yeah.
You have a really good cast here.
Yeah.
You have a really good cast. You have Ally Maki, is that how you pronounce her name, in the lead role of Judith, who I guess is born in Seattle, so I'm happy about that, having a little Seattle representation here. Luke Roberts plays Steve, and he's BC-based. Chris Pang, Australian actor, who plays Pat. And then, of course, the great Sarah Gadon, one of my favorite actresses in the industry right now, who plays Carol. Strong cast here.
Incredible cast.
Talk to me about what it was like working with this cast.
It was amazing. Luke is actually from He's actually from the UK, but he is Canadian as well.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah,
Very
somehow.
Cool.
Which, yeah, it's interesting he's Canadian because he has a very British accent.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I didn't even detect it at all in the movie.
He he's able to put on an incredible Canadian accent. Yeah.
That's awesome.
It was so wonderful working with all of them. They're just amazing, and I felt so supported as a first-time feature director, and they have such a great chemistry altogether and also such a different way of working. And I think that was something that was really special for me to kind of be on set and have this really positive experience with all of the leads. It can be intimidating for, I think, a director, especially when you're kind of working with these people who have such a rich experience and so much experience. But they just made the whole set this positive vibe, and basically, yeah, it was a learning experience for me working with all of them, and that was so much fun to kind of see how everyone worked and to see like how I worked with them. I feel like going into my next directing project, I've like had an opportunity to sort of work with such a variety of actors. So yeah, very fortunate, and they all did such a great job.
They
obviously.
did.
Yeah.
They really did. That's really cool to hear, and I'm happy that was an awesome experience for you as a filmmaker and director here. Identity is a big theme in this movie. It comes up multiple times with multiple characters, and I guess I want to know more about kind of the inclusion of that theme so strongly in this film. Judith is Japanese Canadian, right? And there's just a lot of preconceived notions that come with that. There's a lot of misconceptions and presumptions that come with that in her character and with her children. I remember one scene in particular that stood out to me the first time is when I think it's Steph talking with her friend, or not even talking, they're just hanging out, and her friend says, "Where's your mom from?" And Steph says, but she goes, "Where's your mom from?" And it's so interesting how these characters are handling these kind of conversations, because there's this like uncertainty of like, well, how am I supposed to respond to that? What are the social norms here? Talk to me more about that. There's so much to dive into there.
There's a lot. So I think that, kind of jumping off of what you just said, it's set in the 90s. So I think that they're having all of these conversations that to an audience in 2023 were kind of like,
oh yeah, I got 10, so I'm like, ooh, you're not supposed to ask that.
yeah, like we know now, some people, but some people don't, right?
That is true.
Like that's why it was also important for me to kind of show what I guess a lot of people would call microaggressions or othering, these kind of conversations that I think like, a lot of mixed race people or any racialized people have had experience with. And I think growing up in the 90s, like you might hear something that makes you feel a bit like uncomfortable, but you don't know you don't necessarily have the language, because some of these terms are, I think they've existed for longer, but maybe more in academic circles, certainly not like kids didn't necessarily know these words and maybe don't still, but I think even teenagers now are starting to have more dialogue around this in more recent years. And I think that's why it was kind of important for me to show this type of racism in the film, because it already has, like I've already spoken to a lot of people who are like, oh yeah, like, I guess calling someone exotic isn't like
that did happen, and it's just glossed over in the movie, which is what would happen in the 90s.
It's realistic to the 90s. I want it to be realistic, because if someone brings it up every time, it's not going to be realistic. But then at some point, Judith does try to verbalize it, and of course it's shut down because that was also realistic. And I still think that there is a consequence to what is happening. Some people might want to see more of like, someone kind of getting, like maybe they would have wanted Judith to win that conversation and really put Steve in his place. But personally, I wanted to be realistic. And also, I think in the end, there is a consequence in terms of what happens to the fracturing in their family. And, realistically, people don't change in one moment. they're defensive at first, and then over time, like, you just hope that they will change. And I think in the story, the end of the film is maybe the beginning of Steve's transformation that we won't see, but I do think that that was a more fulfilling way for me to end the film. I hope this isn't like a spoiler, but like, no, I do think it's important to kind of, hopefully that was vague enough to speak to.
I think it's vague enough. I think because there is so much to take to take away from this film.
In that moment,
so, I appreciate that. And I also am really relating with what you're saying about being realistic on these kind of conversations, because I think what happens a lot, particularly in Hollywood, is what I guess I call virtue signaling, where it's like, oh, we need to do this so that we can show that we're really standing up for this cause. And, maybe the intentions are in the right place, but I don't know if it's as effective as what Seagrass does, where it's like, oh yeah, I recognize that. And I understand how that can happen. Totally. And I see where the error is in that. Yeah. And we can, as an audience, deduce ourselves, the correct way to go about those things, or, how to engage with those conversations rather than it being spoon-fed to us.
I think it's a lot more of a nuanced way to do it personally, and it's what I prefer to see on screen. And I think it creates more conversation rather than it being this like overly simplified approach to talking about these subjects. Like, to overly simplify is almost to not do justice to the complexity of what is happening internally for the people who are experiencing it, the characters, right? Yeah.
Absolutely.
You also asked a bit about kind of identity in a larger form, which I'd love to speak to as well, because I think that is a big component, aside from the racism that you see in the film and kind of the depictions of how everyone deals with that. I think that what Judith is going through is such a specific thing to Japanese Canadian and Japanese American culture. She is realizing how much has been lost. And of course, this is in the 90s, so her mother was incarcerated during the incarceration of Japanese Canadians. And now that she has lost her mother, she's realized that she's lost touch with that story that she can never regain, and also she's lost touch with a lot of history, aside from that, and also culture as well. And it's something that, speaking to a lot of other Japanese Canadians I've seen, is such a common thread for all of us. Like, we've all lost touch with our histories because I think the way that our grandparents dealt with it is they wanted to kind of, I think that they just wanted their kids to belong. And they had spent so many years being told that their existence wasn't right. And it clearly created this kind of, well, obviously a literal fracturing of community where, the vibrant Japanese Canadian communities that existed pre-war no longer existed. Everyone was dispersed throughout the country, and they'd gone through such a painful, horrible experience that I think, it's very clear to, I think, my generation that, like, I think we're starting to realize at least, like, oh, this is why we've lost so much.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's so powerful, and it comes through in the movie with Judith and the complications that she's dealing with. I mean, obviously losing your mother is already a devastating situation, but then to also come to the realization that with the loss of your mother, you feel like you've lost a piece of your heritage, a piece of your culture. And she raises that point in the film, and it's a very powerful thing to think about.
Yeah. Like this two ways of feeling grief in that moment. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So the film had its world premiere in Toronto, and now it's here in Vancouver.
Yes.
I just want to know, what does it mean to you to have this film playing at such prominent film festivals?
I mean, it's so exciting. It's so great. I was just so thrilled at TIFF. It was completely overwhelming in a great way. And to just kind of, I was terrified before the first screening, just terrified. And it was so surreal to be there and to see the whole audience and to hear people laughing when I was like, oh, yeah, like I forgot that people might react to these moments, like actually, like for me to hear something was really good. So yeah, it was just wonderful. And then of course, Vancouver, it's been so great because we shot in British Columbia, and so much of the cast and crew were able to be here, which was so nice.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
So wonderful. I'm really happy to hear about the success that the film has had so far. You won an award over in Toronto, right?
Yeah.
That's right. Talk about that and what that was like.
Like, weird. It was so, I mean, such a pleasant surprise, like such an honor, really. And I was just leaving Toronto and heading to Halifax, and you know, after such a big event, it can feel a little bit like, okay, back to reality. I mean, and I was of course excited to head to Halifax as well, but it was kind of that travel day in between.
Of course.
And I got the email and I was just like, oh my God, this is amazing. So yeah, it was a huge honor.
That's very cool. I have to wrap up. I honestly could talk with you about this for all day.
Yeah, me too with you.
This has been great. But I want to wrap up with this question. In making this movie, was there ever a point where you learned something new about or revelatory about family or heritage or even life in general?
I think that writing about like anything that is meaningful to oneself requires a lot of, for me it did require a lot of courage. I think there was a lot of fear going into writing about things that I care about. It's kind of like you're putting a little part of your soul on screen, and I think for me there was a lesson in just like pushing through some of those fears and like doing it. And I think before doing the film I didn't think I could, and now, you know, going through everything, I was like, okay, cool, like, great. It's possible to kind of speak to these things, and like it might be scary at times, but sometimes you just have to keep pushing through. And I realized throughout the process that there was so much support around me as well, and that it wasn't as bad as I thought it would be to kind of speak about vulnerable things. So yeah, I guess that was my life lesson for this film.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
That's so cool. And really, everything about this just makes me really excited for what you do next as a filmmaker. So
thank you so much.
Congratulations on the film and all the success it's had. And I'm really wishing you the best going forward with your career, okay?
Oh, thank you so much.